The only toe bones I remember are metatarsals and metacarpals.
I'll take a keyboardoscope. Hi, and welcome to the HACKADAY podcast. My name's Elliot Williams. I am editor-in-chief of HACKADAY.
And I'm your co-host, Kristina Panos, assignments editor at HACKADAY.
This is episode 177. Today we'll be talking about microscopes, telescopes, telephonoscopes, and a keyboardoscope. Well, the big news from space this week is that the James Webb Space Telescope finally put out its first images, and I do have to say they are stunning. Like, Dan, who's been following the Space Telescope a lot, was like, they're not going to reveal images until they have something really, really super good. And man, they are awesome images. We'll throw some links in the show notes if you haven't seen them. You really should. Like, have you seen these yet, Kristina?
I have, and I was looking at another site that does side-by-side comparisons with Hubble images, and it's like getting, if for anybody who has glasses, it's like when you got glasses for the first time and you can see the individual leaves on the trees all of a sudden and them moving in the wind and just crazy detail like that. It's just
right?
Fantastic.
Some of the pictures are just like straight up beautiful. Like they took some nebula pictures, and there's one of apparently Stefan's quintet, it says, where there are 5 galaxies and they're kind of spinning around, but 2 of them look like their dust is kind of intermingled. They're like spinning too close to each other, and there's co-gravitational effects. That is awesome looking. But the one that really freaks me out, and the one that I think is really going to be, that shows the way toward the new science we're going to get out of this telescope, is the one called SMACS 0723. SMACS 723. And it is the deepest image ever taken into the past, like the furthest away, and so the deepest redshifted. But it's really interesting looking. I think there's going to be tons and tons of interesting new science coming out of this.
Definitely.
And I'm stoked. I saw a really good video put out by Scientific American on this topic. I'll throw the links in. It's a little bit like rah-rah science, but the one thing that most everyone who's working on the James Webb project says is that, we have a few really good ideas, and there's a bunch of things that we're going to point it at for this first year. Like, the first year's worth of science is like fully booked out. But then, what people are actually going to discover with this is kind of a we don't know. We've never been able to look this far back in, far away in time, far away in space, far back in time. We just don't know what we're going to discover. And that's really great. When you have the heavy hitting astronomers saying, oh, we don't know what we're going to find. It's like scientific terra incognita. And it's just so exciting to think of that.
It sounds like science grew a new sense and doesn't quite know what it's capable, what it's going to sense exactly.
Yeah, right? It's exactly right. It's like, hey, we're looking through a microscope for the first time ever. Oh my God, look at what's growing in your beer.
I thought you were going to say beard.
Don't look at beards with microscope. Yeah, no, so we'll see. I think that's half the fun, is that we've got things we know we're looking for, like good images of exoplanets, and I don't know what. I've forgotten what all is on the list for the first year, actually. But I think it is the, whoa, what's that kind of moments that I'm most looking forward to.
This is a journey into sound.
What's that sound?
What's that sound?
I picked a devilish What's That Sound this week.
Why does it remind me of... It sounds like a Jack in the Box, but being cranked underwater and not playing the right song.
Lovely.
I mean, it's either that or a steel drum, right? Underwater.
Well, I'll give the listeners out there a hint. It's a bit of a conceptual art piece by a composer I really like. He does a lot of kind of technical music pieces, technical conceptual musical art. Whoa. And if you can find it, but you didn't know it before, maybe you'll find something you like. Who knows? But best of luck to you all. As usual, if you want to take a guess, head on over to hackaday.com/podcast. You'll find a link to a form. Fill that out with a nickname that you'd like to be called on the air and your best guess. And if you get it right and we pick you randomly next week, I'll get you a Hackaday podcast t-shirt. Whoa. Okay, that sound is people sawing outside Kristina's house. I can tell.
There's some hammering.
Should we get on to talking about the hacks?
Well, sure. Let's do it.
I'd like to start off this week with overwhelmed by odd inputs, the contest winners, and more, because, well, I wrote the article about the winners of the odd inputs and peculiar peripherals contest. And it's true. I was absolutely overwhelmed. We got like 75 entries, and all of them, not all of them, and like most of them were really, really great. And it's one of those horrible things that you have to pick 3 to win some money in one of these contests. And we did have to do it. And basically we had multiple judges. And so we went with the ones that scored highest across multiple judges. Instead of saying, I'll pick one person's favorite and another person's favorite, I kind of went with the like consensus obvious cool ones. And so the ones that won were all in everybody's top 5. And they were Keybon, which is a macro pad with OLED screens. And the really cool thing, besides just the really beautiful 3D printed design, is that it also has an application that runs on your computer that tells it what to display on the OLED screens. So depending on what program you're running, the buttons all have different labels on them. And so, when you're doing video editing, it's got the video editing buttons. And when you're doing, websites, up comes a little Jolly Rancher icon, and you press on that and it loads Hackaday. That's just a sweet, sweet, sweet little device. And it's one that makes you wonder why you can't buy this. This should totally be a product.
Definitely.
The next one of our 3 winners, all of which get $150 gift certificate from DigiKey, was the Cree board, which is a joke about keyboard, Cree LEDs, Cree board, and it uses super bright LEDs as the keycaps. And so you press it, and the light is so bright that it illuminates through your finger. And so it uses your finger, basically, as the diffuser. It's a crazy idea, and it just looks really funny. And I think because it's just so wacky and whimsical, everybody loved it. I think if you didn't put your finger down over the LED, you'd go blind, though.
Definitely.
And last up of the 3 prize winners was Josh EJ's exercise bike turned into a wireless gamepad, where he basically put an ESP32 pretending to be a Bluetooth gamepad incorporated it into an exercise bike, so he can go faster in his racing games when he's going faster by pedaling faster. And I think that's loads of fun. It's something we've seen before, but what stands out here is both the superb documentation. Like, your exercise bike isn't going to be the same as his, but he actually documents this so well that I bet you could figure out how to do the same thing with yours as well. And then just use his software for the ESP32, and you are off to the races. It enumerates as a standard, like, Xbox 360 game controller, so, whatever you want to play, you can then control the speed, and he's added joysticks and some other things while on your exercise bike. Do you see any you want to talk about?
One thing I will say is I really like to see KSP controllers, Kerbal Space Program controllers.
Yeah.
I don't play it. I want to play it. I honestly probably will never get around to it because I have game guilt. I don't have the attention span for long games like that. But I just love how they all tend to look like busy boxes or... Well, I mean, like they're supposed to look. They look like cockpits. And
Yeah.
who wouldn't want to use a cockpit, an actual set of controls versus keyboard and mouse? Come on.
Industrial busy box. Exactly.
Yeah.
Dude, did you see the one from Mech Warrior then? That one is insane. This is the Mech Warrior series of games. Must have been going on for a long time. You're in a fighting mech and you kind of run around, and it's an incredibly complex game with, far too many controls. You can only run so far so fast and shoot so many weapons before it overheats and you have to take a break. And it's a really cool game, but this is just a phenomenal control panel for that. It's all like black and orange with a million OLED screens in it, it looks like. And I don't know, the fit and finish on that one is astounding. And then there are some pictures on the I.O. page where you go kind of behind the scenes, and it's actually made out of wood. It's like painted wood, and the whole thing, I could have sworn it was like anodized aluminum. It's just so that's really cool. That's one of the cooler like prop cockpit things I've seen in a long time, and would definitely makes me want to play Mech Warrior again.
Well, with this one, I love how inclusive it is without being visually cluttered.
Yeah, right?
And I think that has to do a lot with the different types, like the square buttons versus the toggles.
Yeah.
And I think it has a lot to do with the typeface chosen for the labels. It looks fantastic.
Tons and tons of crazy, awesome, personalized peripherals here. And I think the kind of personal / idiosyncratic nature of all of them really, really shines through. You really should go look through all of them because there's tons of inspiration for your own crazy hacks here.
There's something for everyone. My first hack this week is a guitar from scratch. Now, Benson Craft has never made a guitar before, and in fact doesn't even play the guitar, but why should that stop anyone? It shouldn't. In fact, I would think that if you knew what you were doing with woodworking or however you decided to craft a guitar, you would have the beginner's lack of bias on your side.
Right?
Anyway, Benson Craft didn't use any kit pieces at all, or even buy a single guitar component except for the strings. Now, I'm going to say that again. He didn't buy a single component except for the strings. He wound the pickups, which that's, people wind pickups. Made his own bridge. Okay, that's getting a little... But here's where it gets crazy. Made the tuners and the fret wire. Didn't just buy fret wire and cut it up. Made fret wire. Fret wire, the profile of fret wire looks like a mushroom, kind of. Well, it looks a lot like a mushroom, where the stem sits in the slot, and the cap is the business part that separates the frets. So this video, talk about workshop ASMR, which we will be talking about later. But it's especially nice at 2x speed, I must say. Not too fast. I recommend 2x speed, because there's no talking. It's just building sounds.
He built the bridges himself as well. Like he's machining. Yeah. I'm watching him machine the parts that will eventually be the bridges at the bottom, and those are kind of tricky. At least on a bass guitar, they determine the height above the fretboard and a whole bunch of other things that make the thing either playable or not.
I don't suppose he made the pots or the toggle switches, but you get the idea.
Yeah, the tuning pegs is another one of those things that I would not have made myself either.
No.
Wow, well, that is a crazy experiment. Why would you do it? Firmly in the because you can category.
Yeah. It looks a lot like my guitar that I use currently, which is neither here nor there. I just thought it was interesting.
All right, well, my next hack is trying out a 3D printed microscope lens adapter. And this is kind of a twofer. On one hand, there's a video by Michael Whittle where he's trying out this microscope lens. And then the other half of it is Nicholas Sherlock's lens design here. And I guess is it a lens? Is it a lens adapter? I'm not 100% sure what this thing is. But the idea is to get super detailed macro photography shots. And the idea is to take a microscope objective lens and build basically a custom tube that then can attach to your camera. So one end it has a microscope mount, other end it has your camera's particular mount profile on it. It's 3D printable, so you just print out the one you need, buy this relatively inexpensive microscope objective lens for like 20 bucks, screw it together, and then boom, you've got an ultra macro photography lens. That's really neat looking. When Michael Whittle tests it out, he finds that, it needs a lot of light, so you're going to have to come up with a flash solution for it. And it's also got an incredibly shallow depth of field because the microscope here is a 4x microscope lens. So it's making everything a lot bigger. And that means that it's only going to be in focus for, kind of less than a millimeter deep into the image. And so if you're taking pictures of anything that's at all 3D, well, you're going to have to do something about it. And part of what I thought was neat about Michael's video is that he goes a little bit into some of the focus stacking tricks he uses there. So he'll take a whole bunch of pictures at different focal depths and then later on combine them in post-processing, and you get kind of a much sharper image than you otherwise would have. I was a little bit disappointed that he didn't have an adapter for my particular camera. And then when I looked at it again, he had just put one up. And I had to laugh because, when I first saw this project, there was no Fuji adapter for it. And then by the time I had edited it, scheduled it, boom, there was a Fuji adapter again. And Nicholas himself comes into the comments and he's like, "You're in luck. I just published the Fuji version a few hours ago." So that's the way the internet works, people. So I had to order one of these microscope lenses. When it comes, I will give this thing a good shot. We'll see how it works. See if I can hold my hand steady enough.
Could you use an otoscope lens?
I wonder. I mean, they're kind of designed to be really small because it fits in your ear, right?
Yeah.
So they can't let much light in just because they're physically small. But I don't know how close it can get up to the camera sensor either. I mean, the truth is, with 3D printing these days, as long as you have something that can screw into your camera, you can kind of make arbitrarily weird lens adapters. And so if you have a bad magnifying glass lens that you want to somehow strap onto your camera, you can probably design a 3D printed housing that'll let you do this. And that's just absolutely fantastic. You'll get weird, distorty looking pictures out of it. So with an otoscope lens, I have no idea. Is it worth a try? I don't see why not.
Why not?
I learned a bunch when reading about this. I was wondering, he's actually very specific in calling out a microscope objective lens with a 160 millimeter focal distance. But there's two kind of broad schools of thought. One is that you should have the objective lens focus on a particular point, and that makes you have to also have your microscope have a tube that's exactly that length. And the other school of thought is that you have them focus at infinity. And so the tube length can vary, and it just focuses on the eyepiece lens one way or the other. Anywho, video is awesome. 3D print that goes along with it looks like fun. And for 20 bucks, it's definitely worth a try because a serious quality multiple X macro lens like this costs hundreds of dollars. And here you can do it for virtually nothing and the price of a 3D printer.
For my next hack, I chose Berlin clock takes inspiration from sci-fi sources. Looks incredible. And I would have to agree with that. We like clocks around here. Myself, in particular, I like Berlin clocks. They tell time through LEDs of various shapes and sizes, if you're not aware. Some of the LEDs blink and others don't, and you read it from top to bottom with the hours, minutes, and seconds flowing in that direction. This one uses an AT-Tiny 167 and an RTC, and it's essentially just the PCB supported by the USB-C connection in a nice 3D printed frame / enclosure, but the board looks fantastic. It's got a great silk screen on the back and a useful silk screen on the front that divides up all the LEDs the way they're supposed to be, and I think it just looks great, and it's a completely open source if you want to make your own.
Yeah, I think that's about accurate. It is just looks great is about right. And it's a tribute to kind of what cheap PCB manufacturing has done for us all, right? It's made on a whim and it's just the PCB and boom, done. Berlin clock freaks me out a little bit, though. The thing I don't know if like is the right word. The thing that I don't ever quite get about it, to tell the time, you have to like decode it a little bit. And the top row of LEDs are 5s. And so when 2 of those are lit up, it's 10 o'clock. And then there's a bottom row of LEDs underneath it, and those are singles. And so when it's 11 o'clock, there'll be 2 up top and 1 below. And so it's this kind of base 5 math that you have to do. And I do base 10 and I do binary, so I'm happy with base 2. And I use hexadecimal a lot, so I'm happy with base 16. Clocks are kind of base 12 by themselves. And so we're all raised with clocks that work on, 12-hour cycles. And this just throws another one in there. This is like, for no good reason, base 5. And that...
It's like ticking, it's like tick marks. It's like hash marks, you count 1, 2, 3, 4, and you draw a line through it for the 5th one. 1, 2, 3, 4, I don't know.
That's exactly right. Yep. I can't say you're wrong.
Well, I'm not trying to argue.
But I look at this thing and I can't tell if it's before lunch or after lunch even. Like if there's 2 of them, if there's 2 on the top lit, it's at least 10 a.m. And if there's 3 on the top lit, it's at least 15, so it's 3 p.m. That's not so bad, actually. Yeah. Well, maybe I could get used to it. I don't know. Take some wrapping my head around.
And do you always need to know all the significant digits of the time? Do you need to know it's 2:36 where I am right now? Or it's like 2:30 good for you? I just want to know when it's time for lunch.
True that. Well, let's see, it's 2 up top and 2 down below. Well, that's not bad. It makes a kind of a little 4 square pattern.
Yeah, days half over. And days half over.
And days half over. Okay,
so you got
okay.
the top half of the quadrant is lit.
Okay.
I don't know. It's pretty.
Okay.
It has its merits.
I buy it. I was reading up on the Berlin clock from another post we did on it recently, and apparently it's still standing and still functional. It's in a mall up in Berlin somewhere. They're saying anyway, it's the first digital clock. Like it's the first non-hand spinning aroundy clock. First clock to use lights to represent time.
Isn't the sun a light?
Yeah, but the sun's doing that spinny aroundy time
Aren't
thing.
Sundials? Okay.
Spinny aroundy.
Stonehenge.
Spinny aroundy.
Okay.
It definitely breaks the idea of any relationship to like sundial, like you're talking about, right?
Metronome. What about a metronome?
Pretty good. You can't tell what time it is on a metronome.
But it
counting.
Counts time. I guess it would be busy, but I really like the checkerboard ground plane or whatever's going on there in the waist part of the PCB.
My next hack is Herb Peripherals. Use April tags to let guests open your front gate. This is really cool. Herb was messing around with April tags for computer vision experiments with robots. And if you don't know April tags, they're actually a lot like QR codes, except kind of lower resolution, blockier, and easier to resolve on cameras with less resolution. And so they're used in a lot of robotics as like markers around the room and for computer vision. So in this case, he had the gear on hand and was like, what if I set up a camera outside my house, and when someone presented the right April tag to it, I would let it open my gate for me. So it automatically unlocks his front gate. So he sends the right April tag to people he wants. They put it up on an image on their mobile phone and hold it up to this camera, and then that unlocks his front gate. I just think that's a hilarious interaction to like send people essentially encoded data pictures and have them hold it up to a camera. But the hack itself is actually really cool in a way. It is completely remotely operated and runs on a 12-volt like car battery, deep cycle lead battery, he says. And it's using an OpenMV camera, which is a project that actually I think I first saw on HACKADAY and was entered in the very first HACKADAY prize back in 2014. I'll throw a bunch of OpenMV links in the show notes here. It's progressed tremendously in the past 8 years. It used to be kind of some small microcontrollers inside and would do some very rudimentary computer vision things for you. So it makes the process of doing simple self-contained computer vision machines a lot easier. The point here of using something like this is that it's low power enough that it can run off of this remote battery that he has on this fence post on the gate way far away from the front of his house where he doesn't have any power. So it's actually the ideal application here. And if you look at the Python code that he has running on this, it's really, really easy to read and or probably was easy to write. Like, if you know Python at all, it is super simple looking.
It's too simple looking if you ask me.
Something's going on here. Wait a minute.
Well, I grew up drinking the Java, so I'm into semicolons and strongly typed. Anything can be anything. What?
There's no way the computer will figure that out. I know that a bunch of our HACKADAY writers have played around with the OpenMV stuff and really enjoyed it. Back in the day, Brian Benshoff was super interested in it, and these days our kind of computer visionist Donald Papp has been a big fan. So give him a look, see if that's the sort of thing you're interested in, and have a look at this crazy front gate opener.
My next hack is Nathan's, a handy tester for a mountain of PS2 keyboards. Now, the lucky Nathan had a chance to buy literally thousands of PS2 and AT keyboards. And if you had literally thousands of PS2 keyboards that needed to be tested, as any one of us would probably do, even if there were only dozens of keyboards to test, Nathan made a portable tester, which is basically just an Arduino, an old Parallax LCD for the display, interestingly enough, and naturally a PS2 connector for the keyboards. And he just plugs them in and goes and does the testing. And if you're unaware about this, PS2 keyboards don't need any special drivers in general, and they just plug and go, unlike USB. And if you have trouble getting into like the BIOS because your keyboard isn't recognized yet at that stage, go find yourself a PS2 and you'll be able to get in. In the video, seriously, the first minute of this video is just a tour of presumably wherever the Keebs live now, some kind of old office or warehouse, and they're just strewn about in various piles, stacked up in cabinets. It's a nice little tour. There are Model Ms among them and other AT-era keyboards, so even if you just want to see the keyboards in giant numbers, just check out the first minute of the video, but really you should watch the whole thing. It's a good hack that's interesting. It's got a good beat and I can dance to it. I give it an 8.
Yeah, you're mentioning that PS2 is like the protocol of last resort reminded me of a video done by Ben Eater when he was looking at various protocols, actually. And this one was his explainer on the PS2 protocol. And then he's got everything breadboarded out, and it's just using shift registers and lighting up LEDs. And you could see exactly what's going on with PS2 along the way. If you find yourself having to code up something for PS2 and you want a great explainer, go give that a look. But I guess you don't need to. I mean, the point of this hack is that you could just use the Arduino PS2 library and boom, you're done.
Massimo's your uncle.
My first quick hack is actually a twofer this week. It's a crypto twofer. I wanted to focus on Henry Schmala's Lift the Veil on RSA with this RSA calculator. It's a neat explainer of how, you multiply the prime numbers together and that gives you public key cryptography. And also Francis Stokes' why you should totally roll your own AES cryptography, which is an awesome explainer of how AES, which is a symmetric cipher, works. In both of these, you get a back and forth between our HACKADAY writers who said, this is really cool, and then all the people in the comments who are like diehard security professionals who are like, don't do your own crypto. But I think the point in both of these hacks is that if you don't look into it deeply yourself, you can't possibly understand it. And running around ignorant saying, I would never do my own crypto, doesn't help anybody. If you want to break it, you need to know how to make it. And both of these will show you how. Next up, Gego with a 3 and a 0. ESP32 powers fresh take on an IoT Geiger counter. This is the coolest, smallest, real Geiger-Müller tube Geiger counter I've seen, he does it by using a lot of tiny SMD parts, which mix kind of only so well with high voltages. There's some interesting stories of arcs and fried bugs along the way, and we'd be careful where we put our fingers on that thing. But it's an awesome looking modern Geiger tube design, so for that alone, it's certainly worth a look. And last up, Fitzdude, weed eater string made from plastic bottles. It's like the bizarro world version of making 3D printer filament out of plastic bottles. He cuts it up, he runs it through something that looks like an extruder basically, and he puts it on his weed whacker. And I think this is absolutely hilarious because the way RepRap and the hobbyist 3D printing movement started out was us using weed eater line, well, either weed eater line or ABS welding filament. And then here we are coming full circle around where he's taking basically a filament extruder design and throwing it on his weed eater.
My first quick hack this week comes from Bob of Making Stuff. Watching a boat get welded together is workshop ASMR. If you don't know what ASMR is, Tom Nardi sums it up rather nicely. It stands for Autonomous Sensory Meridian Response, and it's basically a scalp tingling triggered by certain sounds, and your mileage may vary with regard to the whole thing, really, but with individual sounds. I would argue that this video is more visual ASMR, visually pleasing, because there's music playing most of the time that the welding is happening. Unfortunately, you can't hear the welds as well as one might like. Next up is Nina's Sneeze Into Your Hand, Not Your Elbow, with this nose-shaped sanitizer dispenser. Now this is pretty much what it sounds like, what it says on the tin. It's delightfully gross. It's a giant nose that sneezes sanitizer into your hands. Now we've all suffered through a couple years of various types of sanitizers, regular pumps and touchless foot-activated pumps and sensor-activated squirters, but this one takes the nose candy? No. It's a giant 3D printed nose. It makes sneezing sounds, as you would expect. The sanitizer dispenser was carefully chosen by Nina to give that true sneeze spray instead of just a dollop in your hand. You need that sort of arterial spray of a sneeze. And if you watch the video, which is in German, but it's subtitled, not that you need the subtitles really, it's pretty great. And finally, we have Moncelli's temperature-sensitive Pac-Man Ghost LED Matrix. Anybody who's a fan of retro gaming will love this one. It's, again, it's what it says on the tin. It's an LED matrix that shows a Pac-Man ghost and a Pac-Man, and it will change with the push of a button. But it also takes into account the external temperature, and if it's cold, the figure will turn blue, but if it is warm, the figure changes to red. Now, hopefully, Pac-Man stays Pac-Man colored. Yeah, I just thought this one was really cute, well done. Didn't really notice at first that the enclosure is cardboard, but, you use what you use. Yeah, I think it looks great.
So the ghosts turn blue when it's cold outside.
Me too.
That brings us to our can't miss articles. These are long-form pieces written by our own HACKADAY writing staff. This week I picked Arsenius Pikujin's Open Firmware for PiPhone LTE Modem. What's up with that? And basically Arsenius, well, he actually made the Zero phone, which was a really interesting minimalist cell phone design. And he's kind of our resident cell phone hacker. And he's big on the PiPhone 64 ecosystem, in particular because they're pushing Linux instead of closed source stuff as far as they can. And this is news that they've pushed it even farther than you thought they could, into the LTE chipset. I'll link you to a really neat article written by Matthew Carlson, How a Smartphone is Made in 8 Easy Blocks, that kind of talks about the different parts on the inside of a cell phone if you want a refresher. This is what you would think of as the modem part of the phone, the baseband part of the phone. It's the part that is responsible for talking to LTE ground stations and GSM stuff. In the past, in old phones designs, This used to be kind of a little bit like a modem. You know, you send it AT commands and it does modem things like dial phone numbers for you, and then it hands the audio over to the system processor. These days, these little baseband coprocessors have significant computing power in them, and this one, the Quectel EC25, happens to have enough of a processor inside it that it's actually also running Android. And so you've got this weird situation inside modern phones where you have kind of a system processor that's running an operating system, and then this baseband processor over here that's supposed to do the kind of low-level telephony stuff, and it's also got its own operating system on them, and the two of them have to talk to each other. The trick is, no matter how open the stuff on the main processor is, the stuff on the broadband processor has basically always been closed. And that's the hack here, that they've managed to get an open source operating system running on the baseband processor that makes it possible to fix up problems. Whenever bugs show up on the baseband, they tend to be really hard to fix, and you have to kind of wait until the manufacturers send out a new closed source blob to you. And here, with an open source operating system running on the radio, you can then fix things as fast as they go wrong. Now, this isn't all entirely sanctioned by Pine, and one reason is they probably can't. Advising people to change the firmware and run custom firmware on stuff that's that close to radios makes the FCC pretty nervous, and I think Pine is probably taking a step back away from doing that. I mean, they certainly are all about putting open source operating systems as deep, as far in as they can. But here they kind of may be in a regulatory gray area if they encourage you to flash new firmware into your LTE modem. But they're sure as heck not stopping you, and good on them. It's interesting here, Arsenis goes off on a little bit of a rant about kind of the state of the devices we all live with, where they're open source to a point, and then there's kind of an invisible line that from there on out, everything is closed source. And the reason that that's the case might not be anything that has to do with device reliability or usefulness or fitness for purpose, but instead with this kind of weird regulation, because they're afraid that you will then, issue the command to make the radio talk with too much power, which is what the big scare about people running open source software on their home Wi-Fi routers is. Yeah, we can argue about whether that's a reasonable scare or not. I mean, on the one hand, the FCC does kind of have to run the radio waves. On the other hand, they seem to be giving the manufacturers leverage to enforce you having to run their crappy software on the devices, and I'm not all for that. So it's tricky, it's gray ground, and it's really interesting because this new phone has open source radio stuff on it. It's not completely open source. I think there's still some Broadcom binaries in there somewhere, but it's a step in the right direction, and it's really interesting. And I think if you're interested in open source software and or phone hacking, PinePhone's looking like a pretty attractive platform right now.
I would like to have an open source phone, but I don't know if I want that every day of my life.
Sure you do. I've actually got one. I actually am running an old Samsung S3 because that phone is so old that the radio part of it actually is spoken to as if it were a separate radio part and not a coprocessor. And this makes it very easy to write open source software for the application side because it's not so kind of commingled with some closed source stuff on the baseband side. So the old Samsung S3s, I think, is the last phone with like a straight up modem-y modem on the radio part. After that, it gets murkier and murkier. And you can't change the batteries. Samsung S3 for the win.
I have a Samsung Galaxy X Cover Field Pro, which is it's a first responder phone, and yeah, the battery comes out.
You have the industrial phone. I love that one.
Yeah, it weighs quite a bit. I'm used to it now, but wow, it weighs like
Well, weigh it later. Put it in the
Okay.
show notes. We should have people guessing about how much your phone weighs.
Okay, guess my phone weight. My can't miss article this week is Al Williams. Where are our video phones? Old man yells at cloud.jpg. Just kidding. Al gives a nice tour of the history of picture phones from the very first ideas in science fiction, essentially right up to the picture phone, which is AT&T's concoction. It starts out by talking about telephonoscopes, which were a science fiction idea, but Alexander Graham Bell thought it was plausible using selenium as a way to sense light and convert it into electricity. The title is Where Are Our Video Phones? And, your average smart aleck is going to say, well, it's in my pocket, it's on my desk, wherever it's charging on the kitchen countertop. So maybe a more appropriate title should have been Where Are Our Picture Phones? Because that was essentially the original idea, was to transmit still pictures. Of course, this was before we figured out how to do video. I'm thinking Al's unsaid point is that one company didn't make it happen alone, like Ma Bell didn't pull it off as much as they tried. They didn't get the picture phone over, to use a wrestling term. I'm pretty sure that's a wrestling term. Get them over, make them popular with the fans. Because there was never a nationwide rollout or adoption of anything that AT&T or anybody else tried to create. It just kind of came about because, well, as Al says, and other people in the comments say, we got better video compression and better bandwidth, and there you have it. I meant to talk about the 64 World's Fair a little bit. The 1964 World's Fair was in New York. I believe it was in Queens. I've always been fascinated with it because of the picture phone, but I'm pretty sure that's also the World's Fair where Disney introduced the House of the Future. Is that right? But if I had a time machine, after I did the needful things, I would go to the 64 World's Fair.
A marvelously futuristic World's Fair, right? This is what the world's going to be like in kind of that, oh my God, retrofuturism sort of way. Oh my God is right, though. It turns out that Futurama was the name of the General Motors Corporation's exhibit there. Oh, that's fantastic. Speaking of which, that basically sums it up right there, actually. Yeah, I think the video phone was like one of these ideas that just kind of kept popping up over and over last century, and it was one of those things that, like, it was kind of a wouldn't it be cool if, but then nobody actually wanted it somehow. And I think that's part of the interesting bit of this story, is that even the first quote video phone, the first like phone call that came along with pictures at, granted a low frame rate, was done by like ganging a whole bunch of phone lines together, and was done, when are they saying this was? It was really super early on, 1927 we've got for the first kind of TV video limited frame rate plus audio. And, this is so old that there aren't TV tubes for the cameras back then. This is done on a Nipco disc. This is really, I guess the point is that as soon as people realized they could transmit voice over electricity, it was like, oh, dude, we got to do images now. And, the moving picture had just gotten sound at this point in time. And they're like, oh, we got to add this to our phones. Like, it's really kind of this like super old dream. And it's showed up a bunch of times. In some of Al's examples here, in particular the AT&T video phone, the cost of using them was just absurdly prohibitive. It was like, the phone itself was like $1,500, and the usage fee was somewhere around there. And it's just not something that was ever worth that. It wasn't until digital came along and the ability to transmit pictures became so cheap and the bandwidth so high that it's like, yeah, we totally could have video conferences. Anyway, I think it's kind of fun to see this like century-old dream finally kind of realized. And what do we use it for? People making TikTok videos.
I want to see the timeline where we still have payphones and they're video phones.
Oh, right?
I feel like that's why it's not, or part of why it doesn't seem that special. Because it's not like a big, a phone company network thing is a big deal. They laid the lines, they made the equipment. I don't know. There's just no hurrah in individual.
That's somehow right. He includes this movie clip from 2001 where, he's making a video call to Earth and he has to go into a special booth to do this thing, right? To make a video call. And I think that's part of it somehow. I think there's this kind of ritually, going into a phone booth idea of what telephony was back then that somehow is important to this, this idea / feeling / whatever. And it's not the same as if you can just pick up your phone and turn on the front-facing camera. That wraps it up for this week's HACKADAY podcast. Thanks for listening. If you'd like to reach out to us, you can do so, editor@hackaday.com. You'll find all the links in the show notes over at hackaday.com/podcast. If you've got any hot tips for us, tips@hackaday.com. And until next week,
keep on hacking.
Or even after next week.
You must record.
Damn it.
But then I messed it up. Did you want to discuss ASMR for a minute? Or?
No, not with a 10-foot pole.
Pine phone.
No, that's what they're called. One more time.
Inputoscope. Peripheralscope. Find out next time on HACKADAY Podcast. Dun dun.